They say she saw something in you, but what if what she saw was never real? You ever feel like someone is looking at you, but not really seeing you? She looks at you like you're something more, like you could be someone better. And for a second, you believe it. You feel seen, valued, even special. But that feeling, it's not truth, it's projection. She's not loving you, she's falling in love with the man she thinks you might become, an ideal, a fantasy. And you mistake that spark in her eyes for love, for understanding. You think she sees your soul, but she's just casting you in a silent movie she's been scripting since childhood. And you're not the man, you're the actor. Carl Jung saw this clearly. He spent his life staring into the unconscious, the hidden forces beneath what we say and do. And he warned us, women, often unknowingly, project their inner masculine ideal animus santo, the men they meet. It's not conscious. It's not malicious. It's human psychology at work. And it's powerful. Here's the danger. When you mistake her projection for love, you start performing. You try to become the man she sees, not the man you are. And in doing so, you lose touch with your core. This isn't about blaming women. It's about waking up. Because until you realize the difference between being seen and being used as a screen, you'll spend your life auditioning for a role you never wrote. And the worst part, when you break character, when the mask slips, she won't even understand why she feels disappointed, because she never really saw you to begin with. So ask yourself, do you want to be adored for an illusion or respected for the man you actually are? Carl Jung didn't speak like a self-help guru. He spoke like a surgeon cutting deep into the unconscious layers of the human soul. And one of the most uncomfortable truths he uncovered was this: women don't always fall in love with men. They fall in love with the idea of men. What does that mean? Inside every woman, Jung said, lives an inner masculine image, a blueprint. He called it the animus. It's built from childhood stories, cultural myths, fantasies, past relationships, and when it's unconscious or undeveloped, it starts to take control. It projects itself onto real men without the woman even realizing it. And that's when things get messy. Suddenly, she's not choosing you, she's choosing the role you seem to fit, the image you vaguely resemble. You become a placeholder for the dream she's been rehearsing for years. And if you stop fitting that dream, she won't rewrite the story, she'll just replace the actor. This isn't evil. It's not manipulation. It's psychological possession. And men, especially good men, fall straight into the trap. We confuse that electric pull for intimacy. We think being desired means we're truly known. But the truth? You're not being loved for who you are. You're being used as a mirror, a screen, a symbol. Jung saw it happening again and again. And the real tragedy? Most men never realize it until they've lost themselves trying to play a part they never auditioned for. So let me ask you, are you being loved or are you being cast? There's a moment that hits harder than heartbreak hits, the moment the illusion collapses. She looks at you differently. The light in her eyes is gone. She pulls away. You start asking yourself, what did I do wrong? Where did I mess up? But here's the truth, that no one tells you you didn't fail. You just stopped playing the role. You were never the man she loved. Not really. You were the idea of a man, a fantasy she projected onto you. And the moment you broke character, when the mask cracked, her disappointment wasn't about you, it was about the collapse of her inner narrative. Carl Jung saw this long before modern psychology had the words. He called it projection. And he offered a solution most men never hear: individuation, the lifelong path of becoming whole within yourself, not defined by a partner, a title, or validation, but by inner truth. But that path is rare, because from the time we were boys, we were trained to seek approval, to earn love by being useful, agreeable, impressive. We were never taught how to stand alone. And so when the fantasy ends, most men don't awaken. They spiral, they beg, they perform harder, trying to resurrect a character that was never real. But if you can sit in that pain, if you can stop chasing the illusion, you can begin. You can take the first step toward becoming something no projection can replace. A man who knows himself. Here's the part no one glamorizes. The part that doesn't sell books or go viral. Individuation is brutal. It's not a morning routine. It's not journaling with lo-fi music in the background. It's the slow, agonizing death of every version of you that was never real. To become whole, you have to face what you've buried, your insecurity, your shame, your weakness, the parts you were told no one could love, the parts you've spent years covering up with charm, success, or silence. And here's the catch. You can't fake this. You can't act your way into authenticity. You either go in or you don't. Most men don't. They blame women. They call them manipulative, cold, ungrateful. But the real issue, they've outsourced their identity. They waited to be chosen hoping a woman's love would finally make them feel like men. But true masculinity isn't about being chosen. It's about choosing yourself. Jung knew this. He taught that the man who confronts his unconscious, the man who walks straight into the shadow, becomes sovereign. He's no longer reactive, no longer controlled by flattery or rejection, no longer shaped by what others see in him. He becomes still, rooted, not because he's perfect, but because he's real. And in a world full of projections, a real man is almost unrecognizable. But that man, he's free. Here's the real tragedy. Most men don't get rejected for being too flawed. They get rejected for being too fake. Somewhere along the way, we were taught, maybe by culture, maybe by pain, that if we just become what she wants, she'll stay. So we adapt, we adjust, we bend ourselves into the shape of approval, trying to be agreeable, predictable, always available. And it works for a while, but then she starts to pull away. Not because you did something wrong, but because she can feel it. That mask, that performance. She can sense when a man is no longer rooted in who he truly is, but is just performing the role of the good guy. What no one tells you is this: obedience kills attraction. Predictability suffocates desire. The feminine is drawn to depth, to mystery, to the unknown, not to a man she can fully map out and control. And yet, most men fear something far more than rejection. We fear loneliness. We fear being misunderstood. We fear sitting in silence with no one clapping for us. So we choose roles over reality, masks over identity. We betray ourselves not because we're weak, but because we're terrified of being alone with who we really are. But here's the twist. Until you're willing to stand alone authentically, you'll never know what it feels like to be loved truthfully. Freedom doesn't start when someone finally chooses you. It begins the moment you stop needing to be chosen. There comes a point in every man's life where he has to sit in the silence, no noise, no applause, no woman telling him he's enough, just stillness. And that's where the real war begins. Because that silence, it starts speaking. It whispers every fear you've been running from. You're nothing without her. You're only worthy if you're wanted. You won't survive alone. And that voice will fight for its life. Because it's not just fear, it's your identity. It's the version of you built on validation, built on performance, built on being good enough for someone else. But here's the truth. Until that voice dies, the real you can't live. Carl Jung called it a kind of death, a spiritual death. And he was right. Because to become free, a man has to walk through the fire of his own illusions. He has to stand there raw, uncertain, unseen, and still hold the line. Not to prove something, not to impress, but because it's real. And when you reach that place, you stop performing, you stop chasing. You just are. Your presence becomes your power. Your stillness becomes your strength. And suddenly, You're no longer a character in someone else's story. You become the author of your own. There's a reason most people get uncomfortable around a man who's done the inner work. Not because he's loud, not because he's aggressive, but because he doesn't fit into any of their boxes. He doesn't play the clown. He doesn't play the savior. He doesn't perform for approval. And that unsettles people because when a man stops being who the world wants him to be, he becomes a mirror, a quiet reflection of everything others have ignored in themselves. Their compromises, their cowardice, their masks, and people hate mirrors when the reflection isn't pretty. So what happens? They mock him. They label him cold, arrogant, emotionally unavailable. They say he's too serious, too detached, too much in his head. But what they're really saying is, I don't know how to control him anymore. Because a man who's individuated can't be seduced by flattery or guilted by shame. He doesn't need permission to exist. He's anchored, rooted in something deeper than social roles or fleeting validation. He's not a rebel for attention. He's not distant because he's wounded. He's just free, free from expectation, free from illusion, free from needing to be understood by a crowd still clinging to their own reflection. And in that freedom, he becomes dangerous not to others, but to everything false within them. Something strange happens when you stop performing. The same women who once adored your attention, who praised your vulnerability, your softness, your availability, they begin to pull back. Not because you've become cruel, not because you've changed your values, but because you no longer need them. And let me be clear, needing and choosing are two very different things. When a man stops seeking validation from women, he stops being predictable. He stops being safe. And that makes people uncomfortable because they can't define him anymore. They can't place him in the neat little category of the nice guy, the fixer, or the dream. You've left the stage. You're no longer reciting the script she handed you. And without that performance, she's forced to confront something terrifying. She never actually knew you. She only knew the version of you that was willing to bend for applause. And when the performance ends, so does the illusion of control. That's the cost of authenticity. You don't get to be universally adored, but what you gain is far more valuable. You become unshakable, not cold, not distant, just real. And real men, they're not here to be worshipped or explained. They're here to liven up as characters in someone else's story, but as men who finally stepped off the stage and started living from the core. Carl Jung once said that what ancient cultures called divine possession, modern psychology now calls neurosis. And if you really think about it, he wasn't exaggerating. Because when a man pours his entire sense of worth into the hands of a woman, when he lives for her approval, her attention, her affection, he's not in love, he's possessed. He's no longer acting from soul, but from survival. You hear men say things like, I'd do anything for her, or she's my everything. It sounds romantic, noble even, but look closer and you'll see it's not devotion. It's spiritual illness. These men don't love her. They worship her, not for who she is, but for what she represents, a cure for their emptiness. And that's the tragedy. They've made her the carrier of their soul, the keeper of their identity. And no woman, no matter how loving, can hold that weight forever. Eventually, she'll drop it. She has to, because she was never built to carry the soul of a man too afraid to carry it himself. And when she does, the man feels betrayed, abandoned. But in truth, it was never her burden. It was his. So let me ask you, are you calling it love when what you're really doing is hiding from your own reflection? Because until you reclaim your soul, you'll keep mistaking submission for connection and projection for love. There comes a moment in every man's life when the illusion finally cracks. She walks away, the fantasy dies, and you're left standing in silence, staring at the rubble of what you thought was love. And in that moment, you have two choices. You can blame her, call her manipulative, cold, say she changed, Say she never saw you. Or you can turn inward and face the harder truth. You gave her a part of yourself that was never hers to hold. Because real masculinity, it isn't forged in comfort. It's not born in romance or recognition. It's built in solitude, in the pain you don't post about, in the nights where no one texts back, in the brutal silence where the only voice you hear is your own and it asks you one thing: who are you without her? Most men run from that question. They jump into the next performance, the next fantasy, hoping to feel whole again. But until you stop running, every connection will be a lie. You'll keep acting, keep pleasing, keep losing yourself. But the man who chooses the inner journey, the man who stops chasing and starts integrating, he becomes something different. He reclaims the part of himself he gave away for love. And once he does, he doesn't chase anymore, because he finally remembers he was never meant to be chosen. He was meant to choose himself. Here's the part no one talks about. When a man becomes whole, when he no longer needs to be chosen, validated, or worshipped, something unexpected happens. He stops attracting fantasy, and he starts attracting truth. Women who are still searching for a savior, for a performance, for a man to complete their unhealed story, they walk right past him. Not because he's lacking, but because he doesn't play the game anymore. But the women who have faced themselves, the ones who've met their own shadow, who've burned their illusions, they see him clearly, honestly, not as a missing piece, but as an equal. There's no act, no pedestal, no performance, just presence. Two whole human beings choosing to stand side by side, not out of need, but from freedom. And that is a rare kind of love, a dangerous kind of love, because it doesn't come from desperation or fantasy. It comes from clarity. There's no bargaining, no manipulation, no masked expectations. It's real. And in a world addicted to projection and performance, that kind of love scares the hell out of people. But if you've done the work, if you've reclaimed your soul, then you'll recognize it. Not because she completes you, but because she doesn't need to. Here's the truth. Most men will never want to hear. Most will never get there. They'll settle for roles that keep them liked, for illusions that keep them safe, for praise that never really touches the soul. They'll keep performing wearing the mask just a little longer, because tearing it off, that would mean standing naked in front of the world. No script, no approval, no applause. But for the few, the very few who dare to strip it all away, to shed the layers of performance, the roles, the half-truths, something rare begins to emerge. Not perfection, not popularity, but something far more valuable, the true self. And when that happens, everything changes. Women stop being mirrors for your worth. They stop being saviors to complete your story. They become what they were always meant to be: partners, allies, fellow travelers on a road that's walked in truth, not fantasy. Carl Jung didn't leave us a roadmap. He left us something far more important: a warning and a challenge. A man who refuses to face himself will live enslaved by the projections of others. But a man who dares to choose himselfully, unapologetically becomes the author of his own life. So the question isn't, will someone choose you? The real question is, will you finally choose yourself?